The cameras rolled. The lights dimmed. The iconic set of The Late Show with Stephen Colbert buzzed with energy. But there was something else in the air that night, something sharp. Tension. Stephen Colbert, seated with his signature smirk, leaned forward across the desk. "Denzel," he began, flipping through his notes with exaggerated drama, "you've been a preacher on screen, a warrior, a father figure, but let's talk about something a little more real, shall we?" Denzel, dressed in a sharp black suit, gave a slow nod, eyes calm but alert. Colbert smirked. "You recently gave a speech in Atlanta about political hypocrisy, about people selling out for power. But let's rewind. Didn't you attend a private dinner with oil executives last fall in Beverly Hills?" The audience reacted, not loud, but enough for the camera to pan briefly to their raised eyebrows. Denzel's smile didn't flinch. "You really want to do this, Stephen," he said calmly, but the weight behind his words landed hard. Colbert shrugged theatrically. "It's just curious. You talk about integrity and justice, but the circles you move in doesn't always line up." That's when Denzel leaned in. "You don't know those rooms. You don't know what I said behind those closed doors. But you sit here and pretend your cue cards are the whole truth? That's not journalism, Stephen. That's theater." The room tensed. Laughter halted. The crowd sensed the shift. "You say you want the truth," Denzel continued, voice rising just slightly, "but you package soundbites for clicks. You don't challenge power, you joke while people bleed." Colbert leaned back, lips parting slightly. For once, no punchline followed. Silence. Then Denzel leaned closer and said, almost under his breath, "You just exposed yourself, not me." The camera didn't cut. It couldn't. Colbert blinked, twice. The studio wasn't laughing anymore. They were leaning forward. "Well," he said slowly, trying to recover, "if you're here to give a sermon, maybe I should have invited a priest instead." Denzel didn't smile. "You invited a man who's buried friends under the weight of silence. You poked a scar and expected a monologue. But let me remind you, some of us lived what you joke about." The camera cut to the crowd, wide-eyed, frozen in their seats. Even the band wasn't touching their instruments. Stephen straightened his cue cards, but the usual ease in his voice was gone. "Look, Denzel, I'm just doing my job. People have questions. It's called accountability. And what do you call hiding behind satire while your network cashes in on distraction?" Denzel shot back, his finger tapping the desk. "You roast politicians, but never the donors who pay for both sides of the aisle. That's not brave, it's branded." Colbert opened his mouth, then closed it. Denzel stood up slowly, not to storm off, but to shift the balance. His presence took over the stage. "You say I exploded?" "No. I erupted because men like you dress cynicism in a suit and call it honesty." Then he turned to the audience. "You ever wonder why so many of us are tired? It's not just the system. It's the laughing that follows it. The applause that lets men in chairs like that," he pointed to Stephen, "pretend this is all just a show." The air snapped. Stephen tried one last jab. "You seem awfully triggered for someone who claims to be about truth." Denzel stepped in, low and direct. "Truth doesn't trigger me. Cowardice does." A collective gasp echoed through the studio. And then? Silence again. Not even the red applause light dared to flicker. Colbert sat back in his chair like the wind had been knocked out of him. His usual confidence, part intellect, part charm, suddenly felt like a costume 2 sizes too big. Denzel didn't sit. He remained standing, not in defiance, but in control. "You brought me here thinking you'd direct the narrative," he said. "But I don't take scripts from people who've never stepped in the fire." Colbert attempted a pivot. "You act like this is personal." "It is," Denzel cut in. "It's personal when black men are reduced to soundbites. When our trauma is turned into late-night entertainment. When the only time we're given a voice is if we're palatable." A murmur rolled through the studio. Some audience members nodded. Others just stared. This wasn't the Denzel they expected, but it was the one they needed. Colbert adjusted his tie. I've had Malcolm Gladwell on this couch. Ta-Nehisi Coates. I've had the conversation. And yet you still speak at us, Denzel replied sharply. You quote the pain, not live it. You admire the resistance, but only from a safe distance. Stephen paused, the next card in his hand visibly trembling. Denzel softened, but only slightly. I don't hate you, Stephen. I hate what this desk has become. A pulpit for performative outrage. A confessional for cowards. A place where the truth gets edited to fit airtime. The audience stayed dead silent. The tension was almost spiritual. Then Denzel turned, slowly walking back to his seat. You wanted a viral moment, he asked, lowering himself calmly into the chair. Well, here it is. Uncut. Unscripted. And unafraid. Colbert blinked, then forced a smirk. Ratings love this. Denzel raised an eyebrow. Ratings can't heal a nation. No laugh track. No cue cards. Just the raw truth, and the kind of silence that follows it. Colbert tried to break the tension with a sip of water, but even the glass trembled slightly in his hand. Okay, he said, voice flatter now, so what do you want, Denzel? A revolution? A monologue to cleanse the culture? Denzel leaned in. No. I want accountability, not from tweets, not from trends. But from men who shape opinion for millions under the illusion of comedy. Stephen gave a small, sharp laugh. You think I shape minds? I'm not Congress. But you are convenience, Denzel replied instantly. You make it easy to mock injustice without ever touching power. You sedate the audience with irony until real anger feels impolite. The crowd shifted, uneasy now, not with Denzel, but with what he was forcing them to feel. Colbert squared his shoulders. You're acting like I'm the villain. Like I haven't tried to highlight real issues. You're not the villain, Denzel said coldly. You're the distraction. Gasps. Audible now. One woman covered her mouth. A man in the back let out a low whistle. Stephen tried to salvage control. All right, so tell me, what should I have done differently? Denzel didn't hesitate. Start by listening without waiting for your turn to speak. Stop pretending pain is a punchline. And maybe, just maybe, ask yourself who you'd be if the cameras weren't on. The silence grew heavy again. It wasn't awkward, it was earned. Colbert finally stood up. You know, for someone who hates scripts, you're pretty rehearsed. Denzel's eyes locked with his. Life rehearses us, Stephen. Especially when survival depends on performance. The lights overhead buzzed faintly, the air electric with tension. And for the first time in the night, Stephen had no comeback. Colbert slumped slightly in his chair, his usual spark dimmed. You come here like a prophet, he muttered. But I wonder, do you ever laugh at yourself? Denzel paused. The studio felt suspended, like even the air held its breath. I do, he said softly. But never while someone else is bleeding. There was no applause. Just stunned silence. Stephen rubbed his brow, tension creeping into his temples. Okay, so what, you want me to just shut down the whole show? No, Denzel answered. I want you to stop pretending this is all harmless. Because when satire forgets its spine, it becomes noise. Background music for injustice. Colbert tried a smile. You think you're the only one who cares? I've done segments on police brutality, healthcare. And then wrapped them in a joke so no one had to feel uncomfortable for long, Denzel interrupted. You soften the blow so much it never lands. The word sliced through the studio. A producer off-camera motioned subtly for a commercial break. Colbert waved him off. Let it run, he whispered. Then louder, look, I get it, you want raw truth. You want fire. But that's not how TV works. Denzel leaned forward again. Exactly. Stephen blinked. You just said it, Denzel continued. That's not how TV works. But maybe that's the problem. Maybe it's time it did. The audience, once caught between discomfort and fascination, now leaned fully into Denzel. He wasn't a guest anymore, he was the conscience the network didn't ask for. And Stephen? He looked smaller than ever beneath the studio lights. Colbert straightened up, the humor drained from his face. You want fire? Fine. He clicked a remote and the screen behind them lit up, old footage. Denzel at a gala. Smiling. Shaking hands with politicians Denzel now criticizes. Seems like you didn't always mind the system, Colbert said, his voice cold. A murmur rippled through the audience. Denzel didn't flinch. He turned slowly to face the footage, then back to Stephen. That's the best you've got? He asked, calm and steady. Me playing the game before I knew the rules? Colbert crossed his arms. It's hypocrisy. No, Denzel said, standing now. It's growth. You're mistaking evolution for deception. I was in those rooms so I could one day tear down the walls. The audience stirred. I learned their language, Denzel continued, so I could rewrite the script. What have you done, Stephen? Sat behind a desk and made sure everyone stayed comfortable? Colbert fired back, this is comedy, not activism. Then stop pretending it's anything else, Denzel thundered. Because when people die in the dark, jokes don't bring them back. Gasps. A few claps. Then more. The audience erupted. Stephen blinked rapidly. For the first time, he looked unsure. The armor of irony had cracked. And the man across from him wasn't just a guest anymore, he was a mirror. And Stephen didn't like what he saw. Colbert tried to regain his footing. Look, he said, hands up, this isn't a courtroom, Denzel. This is a late-night talk show. People come here to breathe after the chaos of the day. Denzel raised a brow. You think breathing means forgetting? Stephen hesitated. Denzel didn't. No, he said firmly. People tune in because they're searching for something real. Something true, but what they get is a soft-pedaled version of pain served with a punchline. You're not soothing them, you're sedating them. The camera caught audience members nodding. Colbert chuckled nervously. Okay, so I'm the villain now? You're not the villain, Denzel replied. You're the excuse. That line hit like a hammer. A woman in the front row gasped. Someone whispered, damn. Another applauded. Stephen's smile faded. You think I don't care? Denzel leaned forward. I think you care, until it costs ratings. Boom. The control room didn't cut to commercial. They knew what they had, TV lightning. And it was real. Stephen looked down at his desk. So what do you want me to say? Denzel stood. Say you'll stop hiding behind the script. Say you'll risk something. Or at least, stop pretending this chair makes you brave. Gasps. The live feed flickered as cameras tried to keep up. Denzel wasn't shouting. He didn't need to. The authority in his tone was louder than volume could ever be. And Colbert? He looked like a man finally realizing the echo chamber was collapsing around him. Stephen Colbert leaned back in his chair, clearly satisfied with the stir he had caused. The audience was still buzzing from the verbal clash that had just erupted, and he wore that signature grin, part mischief, part arrogance. You talk a big game, Denzel, he said, sipping from his blue mug, but this isn't a movie. This is America, and sometimes the villains wear the flag just as well as the heroes. Denzel didn't blink. He placed his hand flat on the desk between them, not in aggression but with weight. His voice was quieter now, not shouting, not raging, but carrying a gravity that pulled the entire room into stillness. You know what the real tragedy is, Stephen? He asked. It's not the bad guys who scare me. It's the ones who laugh while the house is burning. The audience, which had been primed for more theatrics, paused. This wasn't a punchline, it was a slap of truth. Even Colbert blinked. You think mocking pain makes it smaller? Denzel continued. You think performing outrage on television is the same as living it? I've stood in the streets where kids die and no one shows up. Not the press. Not the preachers. Not the presidents. But you'll all crack jokes about broken homes before the commercial break. Colbert opened his mouth, but Denzel cut him off. Calm, but firm. You're not evil. That'd be easy. You're entertaining. And that's worse, because nobody questions the clown while the empire falls. There was no applause. No chuckle. Just tension thick enough to bite through. Colbert finally muttered, "It's just satire." Denzel stared directly at him. "Then satirize yourself first. Start there." The camera panned to the crowd, faces stunned, phones lowered, reality setting in. For the first time, the stage felt less like a set, and more like a reckoning. Colbert smiled awkwardly, tapping his pen against the desk in a desperate attempt to reclaim his rhythm. "Well, that was intense," he chuckled, glancing at the camera. "You always know how to bring the thunder, Denzel." But Denzel didn't smile back. His stare remained fixed. Not cold, but crystal clear. "This isn't thunder," Denzel said. "This is the echo of what people are too afraid to say in rooms like this. I don't come here to perform. I don't wear grief like wardrobe. I carry it." Colbert looked genuinely rattled now. "Okay, I didn't mean to." "You didn't mean anything." "That's the problem," Denzel interrupted, leaning forward. "You laugh through the cracks because you've never had to fall through them. You pretend you're challenging the system, but the system loves you, Stephen. It built this desk. It framed those applause signs. It picked your tie." The crowd shifted in their seats. The laughter track operator hesitated. Colbert raised a hand, trying to salvage what was left of control. "But I bring people on to challenge me. Like you." "No, you bring people on to make the chaos digestible," Denzel said, voice now low and intimate, almost a whisper. "You make injustice charming. You turn trauma into a segment, and when it's over, people sleep easier thinking they've heard both sides. But truth doesn't fit into a monologue. It won't wait for your closing joke." There was silence. Even the band, which normally played in at moments like this, stayed motionless. "Let me ask you something," Denzel continued. "When was the last time you left this studio and went somewhere you weren't welcome? Not for a bit, not for a cause, but for real? Where no one cheered when you spoke?" Colbert was speechless. Denzel stood up slowly. "You wear safety like a crown and call it courage. I buried friends who never made it to your green room. So if I'm intense? Good. I'd rather burn in truth than smile in fiction." And with that, he turned to the crowd. Not for applause, but to look them in the eyes. One by one. "Don't clap. Think." Colbert sat back in his chair, noticeably smaller than before, the spotlight catching the faint sheen of sweat on his brow. The crowd wasn't cheering. They weren't laughing. They were thinking, just as Denzel told them to. The cameras rolled in silence. No cut to commercial. No witty comeback. Just raw air. "You know," Colbert finally said, his voice cracking with something that might have been humility or just discomfort, "I didn't expect this to get philosophical." Denzel, still standing, folded his arms. "That's the difference. I live in philosophy. You visit it for ratings." A murmur rippled through the audience. Colbert attempted a half-smile. "Look, I know I joke for a living. But sometimes comedy is how we survive the truth." "No," Denzel replied, now pacing slowly. "You survive the edges of truth. The truth itself? It changes you. It leaves marks. It doesn't punch in and out like a day job." He stopped, turning to the camera now. Speaking not just to Colbert, but to every viewer watching, whether in their apartment, dorm room, or penthouse suite. "I came here tonight not to argue. But to remind folks that when we sanitize injustice with sarcasm, we help it survive. We become its PR team." A woman in the front row wiped a tear. Someone else put down their phone. "We can't laugh our way out of history." "Not anymore," Denzel said. We either face it, ugly, painful, honest, or we repeat it, dressed in late-night lighting. He took a breath. Then looked back at Colbert. This isn't about me being angry. It's about me being awake. Then, slowly, Denzel walked off the stage, not storming, not posing, just leaving. No dramatic music. No applause sign lit. Just a man walking off a stage that suddenly felt too small for the truth he carried. The camera panned back to Colbert, sitting alone at the desk, staring at nothing. And for the first time in years, he had no punchline. If this moment shook you. Good. That means you're awake. Denzel didn't come to be applauded, he came to be heard. And now it's your turn. Like. Comment. Share. And don't forget to subscribe, because this story was just the beginning.